The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace had never felt so cold, despite the hundreds of crystal chandeliers casting their warm glow across the marble floors. Princess Elena stood at the far end of the room, her emerald silk gown pooling around her feet like spilled paint. Her dark hair, usually perfectly arranged in an elegant updo, now hung loose around her shoulders, several strands clinging to her tear-stained cheeks. Prince Alexander watched from across the room, his heart breaking with each sob that escaped his beloved's lips. The formal announcement had just been made to the assembled nobility of 3 kingdoms. Elena would marry Prince Victor of Northaven within the month, a political alliance that would secure trade routes and prevent a brewing war. Alexander's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the gold embroidery on his royal blue jacket catching the light as his chest rose and fell with barely contained emotion. "The decision has been made," King Ferdinand had declared just moments earlier, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Princess Elena will unite our kingdom with Northaven through this blessed union." The words had hit Alexander like physical blows, even though they both knew this day would come. Elena's eyes found Alexander's across the crowded room. 20 years of friendship, 5 years of secret stolen moments, countless letters passed between them through trusted servants, all of it ending tonight. She pressed a gloved hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sound of her crying, but nothing could contain the anguish that had been building for weeks. Queen Margot, Alexander's stepmother, stood near the throne with her usual composed expression. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate crown braid, and her burgundy velvet dress spoke of power and authority. But it was the small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth that made Alexander's blood run cold. She had orchestrated this entire arrangement, convinced King Ferdinand that Elena posed a threat to the succession line. "Your Highness," a courtier approached Elena with a deep bow. "Prince Victor requests your presence for the ceremonial exchange of gifts." Elena nodded wordlessly, her green eyes never leaving Alexander's face. This was it, the moment that would seal their fate forever. She began walking toward the ornate gift table where Prince Victor waited, a tall man with cold blue eyes and a calculating expression. Alexander took a step forward, every instinct screaming at him to run to her, to take her hand and flee the palace together. They had dreamed of it so many times, escaping to the countryside, living as commoners, free to love without the weight of crowns and kingdoms on their shoulders. But he knew the consequences would be devastating. War would likely follow. Thousands would die, and their families would be destroyed. Elena's steps slowed as she passed near Alexander. For just a moment she paused, her hand brushing against his arm so briefly that anyone watching might think it accidental. But Alexander felt the small piece of paper she pressed into his palm, felt the warmth of her touch through his jacket sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible above the chamber music that had resumed playing. "I'm so very sorry, Alex." Queen Margot's eyes missed nothing. She had positioned herself perfectly to observe this exchange, and the triumphant gleam in her dark eyes grew brighter. She had spent months poisoning King Ferdinand's mind against Elena, suggesting that the princess held too much influence over Alexander, that she would never be content as anything less than a future queen. Prince Victor stepped forward to greet Elena, taking her trembling hand and raising it to his lips. The gesture looked romantic to the assembled crowd, but Alexander could see how Elena flinched at the contact, how she had to force herself not to pull away. "My dear princess," Victor's voice carried across the room, clearly intended for all to hear. "I bring greetings from my father and all of Northaven. We eagerly await our union and the prosperity it will bring to both our lands." Elena managed a weak smile, her training as royalty allowing her to maintain some composure even as her world crumbled around her. "The honor is mine, Your Highness. I pray our marriage will bring peace and happiness to our people." The words were the right ones, the expected response, but Alexander could hear the hollow ring in her voice. He unfolded the small paper she had given him, keeping it hidden within his palm. Her familiar handwriting, usually so confident and flowing, was shaky and desperate. "Garden maze, midnight. One last goodbye. I love you always. E." Alexander's throat constricted. He looked up to find Queen Margot watching him intently. She knew. Somehow, she always knew. Her slight nod in his direction confirmed his suspicions. This was all her doing. She had probably promised King Ferdinand that removing Elena would ensure Alexander's complete focus on his royal duties, his future marriage to a more suitable bride of her choosing. The gift exchange continued with painful formality. Victor presented Elena with a magnificent sapphire necklace, the deep blue stones catching the light like captured pieces of the ocean. In return, Elena offered him an ancient Valdorian ceremonial sword, its blade inscribed with blessings for protection and victory in battle. "A warrior's blade for a warrior prince," Elena said, her voice stronger now, though Alexander could see the effort it cost her. "May it serve you well in all your endeavors." Victor's smile was cold as winter morning. "And may these sapphires remind you always of your new home's loyalty and devotion." Alexander wanted to shout that Elena already had a home, that Valdoria was where she belonged, that she didn't need reminders of loyalty from strangers. Instead, he stood frozen, bound by duty and protocol, watching the woman he loved being claimed by another man. The crowd began to disperse as the formal ceremony concluded. Nobles clustered in small groups, discussing the political implications of the alliance, the beauty of the gifts, the elegance of the bride-to-be. None of them seemed to notice the tragedy playing out before their eyes, or if they did, they were too well trained in court politics to acknowledge it. Queen Margot approached Alexander with measured steps, her burgundy skirts rustling softly against the marble floor. "A successful evening," she said quietly, her tone conversational, but her eyes sharp. "The alliance will strengthen our position considerably." "Yes," Alexander replied flatly, not trusting himself to say more. "I trust you understand the wisdom in this arrangement," Margot continued, her voice taking on a subtle warning tone. "Princess Elena will be much happier in North Haven, away from complications." Alexander met her gaze directly. "And what of my happiness, stepmother?" Margot's smile was thin and calculating. "Your happiness lies in serving your kingdom, as mine always has. Personal desires are luxuries we cannot afford." She paused, her eyes flicking to where Elena was still speaking with Victor and his retinue. "I'm sure Princess Elena understands this as well. She's always been a sensible girl." The dismissal in her tone made Alexander's jaw clench. Sensible. As if Elena's breaking heart was simply a matter of being reasonable about political necessities. "If you'll excuse me," Alexander said stiffly, "I should pay my respects to our honored guests." But instead of approaching Victor's group, Alexander made his way toward one of the ballroom's side exits. He needed air, needed space to think, needed to prepare for what might be his final private moments with the only woman he had ever loved. Behind him, Queen Margot's satisfied smile grew wider. Everything was proceeding exactly according to her carefully laid plans. The palace gardens stretched endlessly under the pale moonlight, their carefully manicured paths winding between ancient oak trees and perfectly trimmed hedgerows. Alexander had walked these paths countless times throughout his life, but never had they felt so much like a journey toward heartbreak. The maze at the garden's heart was where he and Elena had shared their first kiss 5 years ago, hidden behind walls of emerald green that had witnessed all their stolen moments since. His footsteps crunched softly on the gravel pathway as he made his way deeper into the gardens. The sounds of the celebration still echoed faintly from the palace windows, but out here, surrounded by night-blooming jasmine and the gentle whisper of wind through leaves, Alexander could almost pretend that the evening's announcement had been nothing more than a terrible nightmare. Elena was already waiting when he reached the center of the maze. She had changed from her formal gown into a simple white dress that she often wore during their secret meetings. Her dark hair flowed freely down her back, and in the moonlight she looked ethereal, like a vision from a dream. But her red-rimmed eyes and the way she wrapped her arms around herself spoke of very real pain. "I wasn't sure you would come," she said softly as he approached. "Nothing could have kept me away," Alexander replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Elena, we need to talk about this. There has to be another way." She shook her head sadly, a fresh tear trailing down her cheek. "You know there isn't, Alex. I've thought about it from every angle, considered every possibility. If I refuse this marriage, it means war. Thousands of innocent people will die because of my selfishness." Alexander closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were cold despite the warm night air, trembling like autumn leaves. "It wouldn't be selfish. We have a right to choose our own paths, our own happiness." "Do we?" Elena's laugh was bitter, hollow. "When have we ever truly been free to choose? We've been living in a beautiful dream, Alexander. But it was always just that, a dream. Reality is arranged marriages and political alliances and sacrificing personal desires for the greater good." Alexander pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "I refuse to accept that. There has to be something we can do. We could leave tonight, right now. I have money hidden away, contacts in other kingdoms who would help us." Elena's eyes closed, as if she were trying to memorize the feel of his touch. "And then what? We become exiles, always looking over our shoulders, always knowing that our happiness came at the cost of others' lives. How long before the guilt destroys what we have?" "I don't care about the guilt. I care about you." "But I care about our people," Elena whispered fiercely. "I care about the farmers who would see their crops burned in a war, the mothers who would lose their sons in battle, the children who would grow up as orphans. How can I weigh my love for you against all of those lives?" Alexander knew she was right, had known it even as he spoke the words. It was one of the reasons he loved her so desperately, her compassionate heart, her sense of responsibility to others. But knowing she was right didn't make it hurt any less. "What if I spoke to my father?" he said desperately. "What if I renounced my claim to the throne? Then Queen Margot couldn't use our relationship as a threat to the succession." Elena's smile was heartbreakingly tender. "Oh, my love, don't you see? That would only make things worse. Margot would find another reason to object to our union. She's never wanted me in your life, and she won't rest until I'm gone completely." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "She orchestrated this entire arrangement. I know she did. She's been whispering poison in my father's ear for months, making him believe you're some kind of threat." "Perhaps I am," Elena said quietly. "Perhaps loving you has made me dangerous to the stability of the kingdom." "Don't say that. Don't let her manipulate you into believing her lies." Elena reached up to cup his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away tears he hadn't realized were falling. "They're not lies, Alex. Our love is dangerous. To the carefully laid plans of people like Margot, to the political balance she's worked so hard to maintain. As long as I'm here, as long as there's a chance you might choose me over duty, I represent chaos to her ordered world." The sound of footsteps on gravel made them both freeze. Someone was approaching the maze, moving with purpose through the winding paths. Alexander instinctively moved to shield Elena, his hand going to the ceremonial sword at his side. "Stay here," he whispered, but Elena shook her head. If we're discovered, it will only make things worse. I should go." But before either of them could move, Queen Margot stepped into the moonlit center of the maze. She was still dressed in her burgundy gown from the celebration, but her elaborate hairstyle had been replaced by a simple braid down her back. Her dark eyes took in the scene before her with obvious satisfaction. "How predictable," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "I thought I might find you here." Alexander stepped forward, placing himself between Margot and Elena. "What do you want?" "To ensure that tonight's farewell is truly final," Margot replied smoothly. "I couldn't risk you two making any foolish decisions that might complicate the delicate arrangements I've worked so hard to put in place." "You mean the arrangements you manipulated my father into making?" Alexander said angrily. Margot's smile was cold. "I prefer to think of it as providing guidance during a difficult decision. Your father was already concerned about Princess Elena's influence over you. I simply helped him see the wisdom in redirecting that influence toward more appropriate channels." Elena spoke for the first time since Margot's arrival, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "You've gotten what you wanted, Your Majesty. I'll marry Prince Victor and leave Valdoria forever. Isn't that enough?" "Almost," Margot said, her tone deceptively pleasant. "But I need to be certain there won't be any last-minute complications. You see, I know about your little correspondence over the years, the secret meetings, the romantic notions you've both been harboring. I need your word that this ends tonight, completely and permanently." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Our word. Elena will go to North Haven and fulfill her duties as Victor's wife. She will not attempt to contact you, and you will not attempt to contact her. You will both move forward with appropriate matches of my choosing, and this unfortunate chapter will be closed forever." Elena's breath caught audibly. "Matches of your choosing?" Margot nodded, clearly enjoying their shock. "I've already begun negotiations with several suitable candidates for both of you. Princess Arabella of Westmarch for Alexander. She's lovely, young, and most importantly, completely uninterested in politics. For Elena, well, Victor is just the beginning. I've ensured he understands the importance of keeping his wife properly occupied with domestic concerns." The implication in her words made Alexander's blood run cold. "You're talking about destroying our lives." "I'm talking about saving your kingdom," Margot replied sharply. "Your romantic entanglement has become a liability that threatens the stability of everything your father has built. This marriage alliance will secure our borders and our trade routes, but only if it's genuine and lasting." Elena stepped out from behind Alexander, her chin raised in defiance despite her tears. "And if we refuse to give you this promise?" Margot's smile turned genuinely dangerous. "Then Prince Victor will receive some very interesting information about his bride's previous attachments. Information that might make him question whether the alliance is worth the potential complications. Without this marriage, Valdoria faces invasion within the year. I'm sure you can imagine what that would mean for our people." The threat hung in the air like poison. Elena's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "You would condemn innocent people to war, just to ensure your political control." "I would do whatever necessary to protect this kingdom from the chaos that romantic foolishness inevitably brings," Margot replied coldly. "Love is a luxury that royalty cannot afford. The sooner you both accept that truth, the easier this transition will be for everyone." Alexander felt helpless rage building in his chest. Everything about this situation was wrong, manipulative, cruel. But Margot held all the power, and she knew it. The lives of thousands hung in the balance, and she was perfectly willing to use that weight to crush any opposition to her plans. "You have until dawn to decide," Margot continued, her tone becoming almost conversational again. "Give me your word that this relationship ends tonight, or face the consequences of your selfishness." I trust you'll make the right choice." With that, she turned and walked back into the maze, her footsteps gradually fading into silence. Alexander and Elena stood frozen in the moonlight, the weight of her ultimatum settling around them like a shroud. Elena was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's trapped us completely." Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "There has to be another way. I won't let her destroy you like this." But even as he spoke the words, Alexander knew they were empty promises. Margot had planned this too well, anticipated every possible escape route. They were caught in a web of political necessity and royal duty, and struggling would only make the bonds tighter. As they held each other in the garden maze where their love had bloomed, both Alexander and Elena understood that their time was running out faster than the remaining hours until dawn. The pre-dawn hours crept by with agonizing slowness as Alexander and Elena walked the palace gardens together one last time. They had talked through the night, exploring every possible solution, every potential escape from Queen Margot's carefully laid trap. But each idea led to the same inevitable conclusion. There was no way out that didn't result in war, suffering, and the destruction of innocent lives. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of sunrise, they found themselves back where it all began, standing before the fountain where they had first met as children 20 years ago. Alexander remembered that day clearly. Elena had been crying because she'd lost her favorite doll in the fountain's depths, and he had waded in fully clothed to retrieve it, earning a scolding from both their tutors but winning Elena's eternal gratitude. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Elena asked softly, as if reading his thoughts. Alexander smiled despite his heartbreak. "I said I would always protect you no matter what." "And you have," Elena replied, turning to face him fully. "You've protected me from loneliness, from despair, from the coldness that seems to infect everyone else in these halls. You've given me 20 years of happiness, Alex. That's more than most people ever get." Her words sounded dangerously like goodbye, and Alexander felt panic rising in his chest. "Elena, we still have time. We could—" "No," she interrupted gently but firmly. "We've exhausted every possibility. You know we have. The only choice left is whether we make this sacrifice willingly or let Margot force it upon us with threats and manipulation." Alexander wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, but he could see the resolution in Elena's eyes. She had always been stronger than him in moments like this, more willing to bear personal pain for the greater good. It was another reason why he loved her so desperately, and another reason why losing her felt like losing a part of his soul. "I won't give her the satisfaction of our surrender," he said stubbornly. "Let her threaten and scheme. We'll find another way." Elena reached up to touch his face tenderly. "My darling Alex, there is no other way. And fighting Margot now will only make things harder for both of us in the years to come. She's won, completely and utterly. The kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to accept defeat with grace." The approaching sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Through the morning mist, they could see a royal carriage approaching the main entrance of the palace, escorted by a contingent of North Haven guards. Prince Victor had come to collect his bride. Elena's composure cracked slightly at the sight, fresh tears springing to her eyes. "It's time," she whispered. Alexander pulled her against him one last time, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of jasmine that always clung to her hair, the way she fit perfectly against his chest. "I love you," he said fiercely. "No matter what happens, no matter who we're forced to marry or what roles we have to play, I will love you until the day I die." "And I will love you," Elena replied, her voice breaking. "In this life and whatever comes after. You are the best part of my heart, Alexander, and nothing Margot does can change that." They kissed then, desperately and tenderly, pouring all their love and grief and unfulfilled dreams into that final connection. When they broke apart, both were crying openly, no longer caring about royal dignity or proper behavior. "I should go prepare for the journey," Elena said, though she made no move to leave his arms. "5 more minutes," Alexander pleaded. "Just 5 more minutes." But fate had other plans. The sound of approaching footsteps announced Queen Margot's arrival, along with several palace guards and Elena's ladies-in-waiting. Margot's expression was smugly triumphant as she took in their tear-stained faces and obvious distress. "Prince Victor awaits," she announced without preamble. "Princess Elena, your escort is ready to accompany you to your chambers for final preparations." Elena squared her shoulders, summoning the royal bearing that had been drilled into her since childhood. "Of course, Your Majesty. I am ready to fulfill my duties." The words were spoken with perfect composure, but Alexander could see the effort it cost her. He wanted to protest, to demand more time, but he knew it would only make things worse for Elena. Instead, he forced himself to step back, his hands falling to his sides. "Princess Elena," he said formally, his voice carefully controlled, "I wish you every happiness in your new life. North Haven is fortunate to gain such a gracious and noble lady." Elena's eyes met his one last time, speaking volumes that their words could not. "And I wish you well, Prince Alexander. May you find the peace and purpose that duty demands." With that, she turned and walked away, her ladies-in-waiting falling into step behind her. Alexander watched until she disappeared through the palace doors, feeling as though a vital part of himself was being torn away. Only when she was completely gone did he realize that Queen Margot was still standing beside him, her dark eyes fixed on his face with calculating interest. "She'll be happier in North Haven," Margot said, her tone almost conversational. "Victor is a good man, if somewhat stern. He'll help her forget these childish romantic notions." Alexander turned to face his stepmother, his grief crystallizing into cold anger. "Is that what love is to you? Childish romantic notions?" Margot's smile was thin and sharp. "Love is what nearly destroyed this kingdom when your father fell under your mother's influence. Love is what makes rational people make irrational decisions. Love is weakness, Alexander, and weakness in royalty leads to chaos. My mother was beloved by the people. Her love made my father a better king. Your mother was a distraction that cost your father precious years of political focus," Margot replied coldly. "When she died, he finally began to rule with the clarity that duty demands. I've spent 15 years helping him maintain that clarity, and I won't see it undermined now." Alexander stared at the woman who had raised him since he was 12 years old, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "You orchestrated this from the beginning. You've been planning to separate Elena and me for years." "I've been planning to secure this kingdom's future," Margot corrected. "Your attachment to Princess Elena was always going to be a problem. Better to resolve it now, while she can still be useful in a political alliance, than wait until it became a crisis." The casual way she spoke about Elena, as if she were nothing more than a political chess piece, made Alexander's hands clench into fists. "She's not a tool for your schemes. She's a person with her own hopes and dreams and feelings." "She's a royal," Margot said dismissively. "Her personal feelings are irrelevant compared to her duty to her kingdom. The sooner you learn the same lesson, the easier your life will be." "And if I refuse to learn it?" Margot's expression hardened. "Then you'll find yourself facing the same choice Elena just made. I have several suitable brides in mind for you, all of whom understand the proper role of a royal wife. Princess Arabella of Westmarch, as I mentioned, but also Lady Catherine of Ironhold and the Duchess Sophia of Goldenvale. Any of them would make an excellent queen and provide the stability this kingdom needs." Alexander felt sick at the thought of being paraded before potential wives like a prize bull at market. "What if I choose to remain unmarried?" "That's not an option," Margot replied firmly. "You need an heir, and the kingdom needs the security of alliances through marriage. You have 1 year to make a choice, or I'll make it for you." With that ultimatum delivered, Queen Margot turned and walked back toward the palace, leaving Alexander alone by the fountain. He sank down onto the stone bench where he and Elena had spent countless hours talking and dreaming about their future together, and finally allowed himself to truly grieve. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of preparation for Elena's departure. Servants loading trunks, horses being harnessed, guards taking their positions. Soon she would be gone forever, traveling toward a life in which he played no part, married to a man she didn't love, trapped in the same golden cage that now awaited him. Alexander closed his eyes and tried to imagine his future. Years of political marriages and state dinners, of making small talk with Princess Arabella or Lady Catherine, of raising children who would never know the depth of love he had shared with Elena. It stretched ahead of him like a wasteland, empty of joy or passion or anything that made life worth living. But as the sun rose higher and the sounds of Elena's departure grew closer, Alexander made a silent promise to himself and to her memory. He would survive this. He would find ways to honor their love within the constraints of duty. He would be the kind of king Elena would be proud of, even if she was no longer there to see it. And someday, somehow, he would make sure that Queen Margot's cold, calculating world of political marriages and loveless alliances would not be the legacy he left to future generations. Love might be dangerous to people like Margot, but Alexander had learned that a world without love was no world worth ruling. As the royal carriage rolled away from the palace, carrying Elena toward her new life, Alexander stood and walked back toward his duties. The battle was lost, but the war for the soul of the kingdom was just beginning.